Hey, once again, and today we're talking about the meth problem here in South Carolina and one very serious case in particular where a meth lab caused an apartment fire resulting in 3 deaths. Attorney David Aylor himself here this morning to weigh in on the case. Counselor, good morning to you as always. Now let's talk about this case a little bit. The 2 gentlemen just changed their plea yesterday in federal court. I want to start with how come they face those federal charges?
Well, it's a situation where when you have a case that either can go in the state court or the federal court, the federal government has the right at any point in time to adopt the case. In this situation, that's exactly what they did. People are initially arrested, of course, by the local authorities more often than not. But just because the local authorities arrest them doesn't mean that the federal government doesn't ultimately take the case over.
Now, why did these gentlemen plead guilty? Was there, I mean, they still might spend the rest of their lives in prison. Sentencing has not happened just yet. But why change that guilty plea?
Well, at this point, they've probably been provided all of the evidence and, through the discovery process to their attorneys, and looking at what they would face, particularly in the jail time, compared to the benefits you get on the federal system of accepting responsibility. They're going to come out a lot better in regards to actual sentencing as opposed to going to trial and losing there.
Now, you just saw some of that video of that just absolutely heinous fire at that apartment complex up in Goose Creek. And Attorney David Aylor, I wanted to ask you, obviously, you know, seeing that and seeing that resulting in death and so many people being homeless, this was a very tragic case, but it's not all that uncommon. Sure, this one went the extra mile and caused a lot of collateral damage, but meth is just a big problem here in South Carolina.
It's a huge problem here in South Carolina, particularly in the low country and out through the rural parts of South Carolina as well. And the reason that is mainly because, one, it's so highly addictive, and 2, also the ease that people have in making it. There's so many recipes on the internet, things like that, that are obviously household items, which are, you know, hard to believe that people actually ingest those chemicals, but that's how they form the meth, and then that's where it goes from there.
Yeah, there was a lot of legislation passed in many other states. I'm not too sure about South Carolina, but things like cold medicine, over-the-counter drugs, and prescriptions, people were trying to make them harder to get, and that legislation, I believe, went through in several states. Do we have that legislation here in South Carolina that you have to show an ID to buy some of those products?
We do, actually. In fact, I just got some Sudafed myself recently, and at the pharmacy, it's taken behind the counter. They have to have your driver's license, take a copy of it, and then, you know, you have to sign a form similar to like any other controlled substance. So that's obviously helped the process and deterred it some, but you still see a lot of folks out there doing it. You see these mobile meth labs that are actually in vehicles using 2-liter bottles, things like that. And it's pretty scary, and simply the reason it's so scary is not just because how addicting it is, but like what happened in that fire.
Well, it's a very volatile chemical, especially if you're driving around. There was a case recently out here where someone was making meth in a pickup truck. I don't even know how that's physically possible. Sure, don't want to get into that, but this is dangerous, and this is putting other people's lives at risk.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see more and more legislation, both here in South Carolina as well as other states, really cracking down on it because of the fact that so many other people are, you know, part of the collateral damage, other members of the families, neighbors, different things like that, because there's such a high risk of explosion when they're performing this meth, you know, making it essentially.
How about the legal recourse for the 3 people whose family member was killed, also the 15 or 20, 30 other people who were left homeless by that fire right there? What can they do right now?
Well, obviously there could easily be some civil you know, remedies for them to go against those individuals who have been charged and you know, more or less at this point now found guilty of those crimes. Now, what you would actually be able to get out of that may be a little bit different. Sometimes you have concern because it turns into an empty judgment.
It also goes back to that legal issue of getting renter's insurance, because you never know when disaster is going to strike.
Right, exactly. And for those whose apartments were damaged, if they had that renter's insurance, regardless of the fact that it was the act of a criminal act of someone else, they more than likely would have still been covered.
Well, hopefully we can get this problem and nip it in the bud quickly before it gets out of hand and we have something like that. Attorney David Aylor, thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to see you. Stay with us. We're back with more in just a moment.